looks to me like it's a combination of people that can approach these people individually and back in their laptops already.
We could do a reverse panel. If you don't have questions for us, I'll ask you.
I like that. Let's
There we
start
go.
with that. I'll
All
have
right.
each of the panelists give a question to the crowd.
So what would it take to get you to attend and participate in developing these retail standards? Does it look like fun?
Could you describe the process?
So a lot of the processes is really just identifying a challenge or a problem that we have, or taking an existing challenge that maybe we've done work on in the past and determining maybe there's been new technologies or new vendors that have come to propose technologies, and then they want to have some interoperability with existing standards or existing retail data. And so once you do that, we go through that RFP process that I kind of talked about, really detail what the challenges are and areas that you want to make sure that the standard that you develop would address. And then from there, the OMG process is to then put that RFP out to the public, so it gets published, and then we look for several different companies to either reply, or even you make our own task force, have a work group on our task force to jointly write a response to that RFP if you want to do it already. So that's kind of the arts process. And so then that response to the RFP would then go to the architecture board for review once you've developed the standard, and then be able to go out and be published. So it's a very back and forth, interactive process. And a lot of it's just sitting down and talking with people for the most part to identify those challenges. I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat through with Dean where it's pick a currency and then go through a use case to make sure that the model and everything that we're trying to develop has all the capabilities that are needed for it to function. So it can be fun, and sometimes it's very long days.
Yeah, that's a way to sell it.
But the process itself can take anywhere between 12 and 18 months, so it's relatively quick, going through from RFP to the adoption.
Yeah.
So question from a standard perspective, once they are published out in the field, can you maybe talk about how you measure either engagement from the industry perspective, or how you get feedback on that standards and arts and their impact on the needs, and measure how prevalent or ubiquitous they might be out in the field?
Quickly, may I check? Can everyone hear that question?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is to identify adoption. Part of the process is addressed, part of that's addressed in the process in OMG, and that usually a company that's going to build or use that specification or help write that specification does a letter of intent saying that I'm going to develop products that are going to be based on this standard, and they have a certain time frame of when they expect to be able to do that once the standard's developed and published. So that's kind of the push on the beginning side of the standards work. But once it's published, we really do lose a little bit of visibility of who's downloaded and implemented it in other new products. So I don't even know if there's a process for people to do any kind of attestation of, hey, I have that, and maybe have a vendor page showing who's deployed or done it. And part of that problem is it's based on not being able to necessarily track, did they implement the standard correctly? What's the, did they implement all of the standards? So what kind of certification process there might have been related to that? At one time in arts, we did have a certification program where we went through, and you would be able to hire Richard Halter or Tom Sterling, our architects, to come and go and evaluate the implementation to give it a stamp of approval, but that was just logistically very difficult, so that kind of dropped off. So really, it's you kind of rely on the people that use that standard, and when they publish their product, they call out that they used art standards for interoperability that they feel their customers might be looking for, but it's nothing that really comes back to us very often as much as we want it to.
I can say, however, that POSLog and Unified POS have both been downloaded well in excess of 50,000 times.
And we do have known deployments of Unified POS or art standards for over 113 countries, just based on those people coming back and asking for help, or help deploying it, or training from Richard and Tom that we've had over the years. So we've done anecdotal tracking of that, and so we know it's very widely used and adopted. But to get a specific number, kind of have a limit.
We
we have noticed that, you know, at least for the data model standpoint, for both data models, we know most of the major ERP vendors and most of the major retail analytics data warehousing vendors use that as a foundation for anything specifically that they delivered in retail. So that we know, I mean, just from the interaction with, you know, the teams from SAP and Oracle and Infor, et cetera.
Yep.
So,
Another question?
So how far out are we from seeing the robots in most retailers? There's a payback there, obviously. And I just wondered if you had any insight into how far out that was going to be. And then do you see that as triggering another consolidation in retailers, those who can afford them and those who can't?
Yeah, let's see. It's on its way. You know, as the component cost comes down and machine learning begins to take hold a little bit more than it does now, so that the applications can be produced more through learning algorithms instead of building requirements and figuring out exactly what the problem is and then writing code to do that. But in that perspective, it's along the same speed of adoption as non-physical robots taking over the legal industry and the finance industry and things of that nature, or teaching, which in all those capacities are knowledge worker jobs that are seen to be vulnerable to artificial intelligence coming in and taking hold over a lot of them. You know, being able to hire a machine learning algorithm to take care of my traffic ticket, for instance, and go through all of the same things that any actual lawyer would go through, but just do it automatically. As that stuff is figured out, then the physicality of a robot that's actually a machine that's going through will continue to be adopted more than it is now. But the price will be, you know, driven down, and then they'll begin to be taken over, I believe, by just devices that do the similar things. So right now it's because a robot moving into a store can take precedence in where there is not the infrastructure already. So it just needs to have a place in the corner where it can be plugged into charge, find its charging station, go back out, roam the aisles and do its thing. A lot of the use cases that we come up with are about, I don't want to impact the store, I don't want to impact the layout because it already exists, and I need to sell that robot to retailers who are already there. They're not going to build their store around it. But when you go to a place like China, where Alibaba will invest a massive amount to build floor plans, they don't need robots to do picking and sorting and delivery. They can use people to do it because they'll build an infrastructure for taking those orders out, and then a person can be relieved to do that job. So that's where it comes down to existing infrastructure, how fast that infrastructure can be updated by retailers in this country versus others has a big impact on speed of adoption.
Yeah, before we move along, let's hear, if I may put you on the spot, Shish. Time frame on deployment and brick and mortar.
Well, so I'm seeing a acceleration happening right now in robotics. And as Andy pointed out, a lot of it is happening in China. The company that I mentioned, Geek Plus, has got 20 customers already, so 20 internet customers that are autonomous e-commerce is what they call them, where the orders come in, the orders are picked up by robots and delivered by robots. So I think till a certain point it was kind of a novelty, but at this point it's actually accelerated. The cost of logistics and last mile delivery is really what's driving that acceleration.
Bart?
I want to ask you a question. Do you see this as turning into maybe robots as a service to retailers? Because you don't want to have a bunch of retailers that have to learn how to service and maintenance their robots and oil them and fix the laser scanner. Do you see that as like, I got one robot, I'm going to service these 5 stores, and it moves around to each of those stores every week or something? Kind of
I do. And robotics as a service, there are different ways companies are thinking about that, including things like leasing out robots so there's companies that are building these robots, leasing it out to retailers, and then doing all kinds of profit sharing and other business models. And that same thing is kind of permeating in other autonomous things. So when I say robotics, it also includes the grab-and-go autonomous stores, where they're kind of saying, can we make a store completely automated? Robots plus cashierless and all of that. And from a retail perspective, the biggest objection that I'm seeing for robotics as well as autonomous stores is really around the cost, where it significantly raises the cost of every retail store. An infrastructure like Amazon Go could be something in the range of $2 million on top of what it costs for the store. So that kind of an infrastructure is kind of is huge for most retailers, and they kind of be backing away and going, I love that autonomous store concept. I love the grab and go. At the same time, the cost isn't feasible for actually doing it.
That's what I was wondering about consolidation. If once the cost comes down some, then there's going to be those who can afford it and those who can't. And
So
it's going to be.
we have started seeing existing clients where IBM's Technology Services Group has traditionally done front of store, back of store, maintenance, device management, life cycle management. You know, we don't care if it's NCR, Toshiba, or whoever it was. It grew out of IBM's legacy POS business. And what we're seeing customers now saying is, hey, we're going to put in 6 floor scrubbing robots in, to cover these 4 stores. Can you manage that for us? The whole life cycle. So acquisition, maintenance, that end of things. We as the retailer will work with the robotic manufacturer on training it for the store. That's not it, but we want you to essentially manage that whole acquisition device life cycle. So just like you do for PCs and laptops and MacBooks and iPhones and POS devices, do it for robots. And so we're seeing that come to play. The other thing that I'm starting to see is I'm seeing a faster adoption in the warehouses than in the stores. So the warehouses, there is a very definite ROI, savings, performance improvement, especially as people now turn their stores into pseudo warehouses and have to do multiple replenishments per day. Making the intelligence in the distribution center makes a lot more sense. In the stores themselves, it's the whole question of, can I afford it, right? The $2 million, and do I expose myself to shrink by going to that fully autonomous store? And that's still not clear. I mean, there are a couple of vendors out there, NCR is one, this company Everseen is another one, that put video over the point of sales and follow people's behavior, and they reduce shrink. The return on investment is several thousand to 1. So if I have to put that in there, then what happens if I go to a people-less store, an associate-free store? How do I know this technology is actually going to catch everything going out the door, or if I just created a shrink magnet?
It's called security guards.
Time will tell.
Sounds like maybe we're done with that one for a moment. Another direction group wants to go?
So question on blockchain. So you mentioned Walmart implementation, there's maybe 26 different entities working together. So that's kind of a lot of people really relying around a common goal. So do you see this really being led more by the private power gorillas with kind of scope like that, or is there really a bigger platform that with which these potentially smaller entities can actually align around a common goal to
So I see two things happening. I see the four most recent, first of all, it varies by geography because there are different litigation constraints in different geographies that make the business case of food safety and food provenance either more important or less important or only culturally important. So if you go to France, it is only culturally important. There is not really a litigation framework like there is in the United States. If you go to Australia, there is a negative litigation framework. A consumer can't sue unless it's the estate suing. So and you sue the government, you don't sue the retailer. So it's different litigation models. So in the case of the United States, what I see is the farmers' cooperatives have now come to understand they can't afford to be the ones saying this is too expensive because whole harvests are being sent to the landfill. Okay? I mean, the cost of the two romaine disasters this year is going to be close to $1 billion, and most of that money was lost by the growers, not by the retailers. Because the retailers have insurance to cover it. Okay? So I see the growers driving more of it. I see the 800-pound gorillas of the retailers or the Nestle's of the world, if you talk about a food manufacturer, as being the ones to make the case to their supply chain, why the supply chain can get benefit from it, but they can't make a supplier on board. Even Walmart, with its supplier letters and the intent of saying, you must be on, legally, they don't have a foot to stand on. It's the business pressure more than anything else. You can't force someone to comply to something that doesn't have a regulatory framework with it. The 800-pound gorilla is going to be the FDA. If Frank Yanis, in his new role as head of food safety at the FDA, mandates that the rule be written, and the rule gets written that says an immutable ledger, there are 30 different solutions out there right now that can do that. IBM's is one of them. It'll get the industry moving in the right direction, and at that point, whichever one has the best economics for survival will be the one that survives long term. And I don't know if it's IBM's, I don't know if it's Ripe.io, I don't know if it's Food Logic IQ. Everybody's taking a different slant on what ecosystem they're going to focus on. Do I focus on a grower? Do I focus on a rancher? Do I focus on quick serve restaurants? Do I focus on, high-end food distribution to, the Michelin star restaurants? Where am I going to focus? And that's all still going to get played out.
I got a question for you, Dennis, along the same lines is, blockchain fixes the problem of needing an immutable record of this transactions, but as we developed the fresh item management to track all that same information in regular databases for years, that you could still get all that level of visibility. What's driving the need for the blockchain part of it? Are people changing those records to say, no, that wasn't bad stuff, or trying to resell it, or what's the reason? What's the driver for the immutable part that's bringing blockchain into that solution that we've kind of already had a solution for?
So what's bringing blockchain in are two things. First is the folks in the supply chain do not trust each other. I do not trust that what you're telling me you're rejecting because it was bad, I really shipped you bad, especially in food. So, a lot of avocados gets rejected when it finally arrives at the store. I'm the avocado supplier. Wait a second. It passed USDA inspection, fine. What do you mean it's rotted? Well, the service level agreement says it has to last X number of days in the store. You took too long to get to the store. No, I didn't. Prove it to me. How do I know your information is correct? So it's that entire piece that's the immutable part for, I'll call it, the business participants. For the regulator, the issue is that if I go more than one level deep in the supply chain, so if I go Kroger, Dole, Farm in Salinas, California, Packer in Salinas, California, Farm in Salinas, California, that Packer is still on paper. Yes, Dole is on an ERP system using fresh item management, but not the Packer. And the farmer is running Quicken QuickBooks and has no idea when you start saying about fresh item management data models, huh? So, you know, it's that end of it where everything, I'm going to say, everything breaks down once you go past the tier 1 suppliers today in terms of digitization. So with putting it on a blockchain, what you're doing is you're enabling those people who've never been digital to get to be digital for something that helps them prove it wasn't me who caused the problem, so you have to pay me for what I sent you. I mean, I hate to say the argument's that easy and that fundamental, but it really is, okay? Everything else comes out of, once all this is in place and I can see dwell times in the supply chain, I can see how long it sat on a dock. I can see that that container took the wrong way from Mexico. It went from Mexico to Port of Savannah instead of Mexico to Port of Galveston. You know, I can see all that other information later on, but the fundamental thing is the people want to get paid for what they sold and what they grew, and this gives them one version of the truth that everyone can work on.
If I may ask, what level of resistance are you getting blow over from crypto as an argument to not invest in blockchain?
I probably, this is something Rose and I talked about. There are about 20 of us who are involved with talking with clients about this in the Americas. I would say I probably spend about half of my time explaining how this isn't Bitcoin, this isn't cryptocurrency. I'm not going to put their vegetable futures on some market in Hong Kong, and getting through all of that. I would say the hype from a lot of the startups that have used ICOs to get their funding to be in this agri-tech area, whether it's agricultural robotics or agricultural blockchain or agricultural provenance of some sort. A lot of the companies use ICOs to get their funding. That has only muddied the water further. I think one area that is going to be phenomenal to look at is how the reinsurance companies like the Swiss Re's of the world and the commodity agricultural products trading companies like Louis Dreyfus and those guys start offering application business services on top of these informational blockchains, because they can now say, well, given the weather feeds and given how your stuff's being shipped, I'll provide you, Mr. Grower, intermediate crop insurance or factoring to cover the potential loss because of the hurricane hitting the eastern ports and your avocado's not making it to New York City in time for them to be sold in the store. I think that's the next phase of it, is the financial piece over the agricultural piece.
Interesting. Anybody else? Okay, let me quickly, I'll give you one, because we're 20 minutes early. And maybe we'll get some time back. Andy, location. What's going on with likely not public context at first, industrial, possibly closed commercial applications, set group of individuals. Location seems to be extremely wound in with privacy. And so all location services opt in, I won't go into all the details. It seems to me that in certain circumstances, if you had a community of individuals who just said, well, I'm here to do the job, I'd like to make it better, I see the tools. You see anything about employees being location-based continuously in their environment, places where everyone will be tracked where they are by the system regardless.
Yeah, let's see. So if we take the part of employees, tracking where they are and how whether they're doing the job that was planned or not to the level of what it was planned to be, I don't think we're seeing any blowback from that in this country, but in some other countries there is. And where it comes from is that in some other places, the value that me as a person brings to a company can be partially attributed to me personally, as strange as that sounds. But so
Especially when you say it.
if I'm having an impact to improve the profitability of the company because information about what I do as I walk around is being used, then I should share somehow in that profit. Now that's much more so the case if I'm a consumer walking around inside of a store and I'm in Germany, for instance. And the value that the company is getting from learning about my behavior needs to somehow be attributed back to me so that I can share in that value because it's about me and my behavior. Here in this country, it's not so much. It's that you've opted in and now all rights are passed off.
That's
no
the job.
longer for you. That's one case where it gets a little bit interesting. Let's see. So the other case of let me think here. That's the biggest impact. Now, privacy is another part. Privacy is something that IBM, Seema Nadler, who's not here today, has done a lot of work in, which is my location can be tracked by the vendor that owns my phone, but maybe I don't want that information, particularly about exactly where I have been, to be passed out to the vendors that they sell it to, even if it's in the interests of helping me do something. Instead, it's about figuring out what are the rights that I pass to a third party so that they can use that location to find something about what I do, but not giving them the underlying data of exactly where I was. So opting into knowing when I'm at home, but not knowing where my home is or where I went to get to home or anything of that nature. Or knowing that I am shopping, but not where I am shopping, where I parked my car, or where I walked into, and the analytics that goes along with that. So it's about bringing up location tracked information and turning it into individual knowledge of events, and then giving my okay that those events can be used, but not the underlying data about what I did. And that carries over into more stuff besides location.
The one place where I do see it being used without any objection is we used to call it hoteling, now it's calling work share locations. So and this is primarily out of Europe and the Netherlands in particular, what we're seeing is several companies there that offer work share locations and hoteling location for visiting employees. A lot of location information within the building where it's used to create the profile of that visitor. So the visitor says, I like my cubicle area at 68 degrees, and because the building has micro vents, that area can be 68 degrees, but 2 desks over it's 75 degrees. because it's near the window and the person who's there prefers 75 degrees, and the person who's at 68 likes the vegetarian lunch and needs a parking spot there because they're handicapped and all these other things. That's a case where we have seen no resistance to location tracking in that business context. Now, the information is not sold outside of that business context. And the service providers who deliver services to that employee, like dry cleaning, pickup, and drop off, know where the employee is going to be because the employee has told them, I need you to pick it up when I'm here, I need you to drop it off when I'm there. But other than that, that information doesn't move past domains. So it's very much like what Andy talked about, siloing the domains. So for me, it would be like Waze I use for one capability, but it will not know that, oh, and now you're in the Walmart store and I'm using the Walmart app for wayfinding in the store. And the Walmart app does not know that on the way home from the store, I stopped at 2 other places before I went back to the house. So it's that kind of siloing of information with the telecom service provider that has that location info, essentially agreeing to silo the information and allow me to control who can see what.
Thank you. Matthew, you have a question? Well, let's take one from the crowd while we got one.
It's not a question, but Andy, I was just going to bring up use cases seem to be driving this, right? So it's location and privacy. And the offset is Burger King just launched that if you're in a McDonald's and they can prove you're in a McDonald's, you get a 1-cent Whopper, right? So Burger Kings that are near McDonald's were using this as marketing. So how do they know you're in a McDonald's? Well, location services. So it's just a recent use case that's going on. So everything, I think, location and privacy, people will give up their privacy if the use cases are beneficial, right? But to your point, is Walmart not tracking you when if you're running the Walmart app and it's running in the background on your phone, if you don't check the settings of location services in that app, they could potentially be tracking you when you go to other stores. And that's just something that most mobile users aren't aware of, right? If
That's
the app's
correct.
running in the background.
In their case, they explicitly say that they will not use that information.
Right, and then that's the flip side of this, which is a risk. Do they, I don't know if you guys remember, but Nordstrom's in Seattle were tracking their customers in the store, and they got major blowback when they did that, right? Because they put up signs at the entrances saying, we're tracking you in the stores. And so, again, it's that the use case was not positive, and the experience and the information being delivered wasn't positive. So you got blowback. But if the use case is good, then people don't care. So they'll give up privacy, right? So my question, getting there, is Andy, given location services, because you've seen them deployed at multiple levels, is when will the world be where, it's just ubiquitous, it's everywhere. I mean, you're outside and you're using Waze, and when you go into Walmart, it just does the handoff. I mean, the location services just switch over, in your opinion, right?
Yeah, I think it falls back to that cost and adoption even of mobile devices, people having data contracts or not. So there's always going to be this segment of society that can't play in that. To some degree, we could say that's already here today, to some degree. And it's there for people who have a constantly connected data contract, have a phone and willing to have it on all the time, have a place to charge it all the time so the GPS can be on. But there's a large segment of society that can't have that in this country and more so in other countries. So that's always going to be a barrier to get, is doing it doesn't actually do it for the entirety of the population. It provides it for some. It's interesting though when we look at like the Nordstrom issue. then we immediately go to walking into an Amazon Go and having your personality traits tracked throughout the store at every turn when you're looking at different products. So, and nobody cares about that at the moment because Nordstrom's already have a hit for what they do. But the same thing falls not just for location, but for all other types of, we're going to use information about you to decide what we're going to offer and how we're going to plan our stores, what's going to be promoted. And that comes even back to the Target problem of the ad going out that was for prenatal vitamins, and nobody in the household knew that someone was pregnant yet. Location is just one more component of that. But yeah,
I think the other thing is the removal of the barrier between public safety, location, tracking, identification, and commerce location, tracking, identification. I mean, most Americans, when finally told that there is facial recognition in every major point of entry
I thought you were going to say
that
casino.
is matching them to the passport information and tracking them through that whole departure and arrival coming back, that if you're in Atlanta airport and you check the little form, you never have to pull out your passport again, or you go through the airport in Amsterdam and it's already implemented. Some people in the US will go, no, I don't want that, and they're going to find you have no choice. We'll hide this from you. You want to use your passport? Oh, that's quaint. Here, use your passport. But we're still doing everything else. Eventually, it'll bleed over into commerce. And the question is going to be, which company is willing to risk their reputation on the potential of negative feedback? And there are some companies who basically view they really don't have that part of their reputation doesn't matter. There are other companies, I've thrown Nordstrom in that, Neiman's in that end, who the history of that company is one-to-one, face-to-face customer service and old-fashioned clienteling. They're not going to put that at risk. And so you'll see those come into play. In the case of my client, the client I've been working with, I don't see them doing that because what they view one of their keys to success is people trust them. I mean, yeah, they're everyday low price and all this other stuff, but in effect, people trust them, okay? And they're not going to do anything to break that trust. Other companies don't care about the trust. They'll break it.
If I may, I want to thank the
No, I have a
panel.
question.
Oh, I thought you were going to start something else.
No, I wasn't giving you the hook. I'm getting ready to ask a question.
Karen has a fabulous
Why?
question for us. Some of them,
Why? I feel like Rodney Dangerfield over here. Okay, so I have a two-part question about robots. At the last OMG retail meeting, I had my ideas about what constitutes a robot radically reset. And so I realized actually that robots are really almost like an interaction point for AI.
Yeah.
So the first part of my question is for Shish about, I personally maybe unfairly think of these sort of humanoid type robots, or the robots in motion as almost being less sophisticated than the ones that are more like the kiosks or the interaction points. So I'd like to know, just briefly, how that's being implemented in because of the analytics in retail. And then Bart, if you could just say a few words, just give us an update on what's happening with the RFP for robots as basically a device of the person with the Shish. I want to hear more about the robots and the AI and the analytics.
Right. Well, and your question was about the human element of.
Yeah, like, so how can retailers
Retailers use these different kinds of robots. I mean, the ones where they're moving around, or where they look like little kids and stuff like that, Pepper, they get a lot of attention.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of things that really are robots that we don't realize we're interacting with, like Alexa, of course, but other things that are maybe a little more subtle. And then how are retailers able to use that?
Right. So, as I was saying, the humanoid kind of robots in the stores, the reaction to them is, in general, not very positive, because people really don't want to be interacting with robots. As a result, what many retailers that I'm working with are doing is they're kind of doing this humans with robots augmentation. And what I mean by that is they have chatbots in the background. They have store associates, human store associates with headsets on. And the store associates are able to communicate with chatbots that have language understanding capabilities built into them. And they can ask questions like, do we have a certain product in stock? When is it going to arrive? And all those kind of things, which a customer would typically ask a robot, because most store associates, because of training requirements and all those, may not be trained enough to answer. This could be everything from product comparisons to more detailed information about products, product availability, and that is really where the robots come in very handy. There's a couple of retailers that have actually implemented chatbot kiosks or mobile applications that have chatbots in them that they can interact with, because most customers don't want to interact with a humanoid robot. There is a lot of development going on with humanoid robots that are almost human-like, but I still think they're fairly creepy. So, but at the same time, I think what's working best is really where humans are equipped with AI capabilities through headsets. In call centers, they're doing something very similar where when someone calls the call center, a robot is listening into the call at the same time, transcribing the call, looking for questions. At the same time, it's connecting to back-end systems to get the answers, displaying the responses to the call center person. And the call center person is very responsive as a result because of the sidekick that he's got on the side. So that's, again, another aspect, a way that retailers are thinking about how do they automate things without really putting robots in place of humans.
We've seen a couple of companies primarily out of the entertainment CGI space, like Soul Machines, right? Company called Soul Machines that came out of the New Zealand CGI industry that have created avatars. Air New Zealand uses it as a customer service agent. So you go on their website and you ask to talk to an agent, it looks like a customer service agent. You agree that they can see the camera, that the camera's on, because the AI agent is looking at your facial expression, and the AI agent adjusts its facial expression accordingly. We've seen a major quick serve restaurant in the US do a trial deployment of a similar thing where it's a kiosk in the store and you go up to when there's a big line and you hit the help and it looks like you're talking to the person at the drive-in, but it's actually that same avatar kind of thing. We see a lot of companies looking to play around with that. When they realize the expense of keeping it trained and up to date and the avatar having the right kind of response and everything else, they go back to, let me have a more than intelligent chatbot with my person on a headset, because I can't scale that up enough. I mean, if you talk about someplace that has, 4 lines, it's a quick serve restaurant, I got 5,000 restaurants, that's 5,000 avatars. Each app, it's all cloud delivered. Okay, what's the bandwidth I need for this thing to interact like a person?
So Bart, I mean, I know that there's an RFP. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so along those lines of bringing it to retail is we have an RFP for a retail communication services device. And so that's something that's going to integrate with that point of sale system. And the primary goal, this is being driven by our Japanese participants, is preparing for the Olympics, where you're going to have a lot of non-native speakers in a country, and you still want to be able to provide a great service. And so the RFP is really to bring some of that dialogue and communication and translation ability that you can do with a robot, whether it's humanoid-like or just looks like something straight out of Godzilla, or whatever. Those are the type of robots that they're using, but it's primarily for the language and communication aspects, so that they can have different languages be supported. Ask questions where to find products in the store, ask about pricing, and all of that can happen as an interactive component in the point of service. So that's what the RFP is written and looking to create. Right now we're at the LOI stage, so we're looking for companies to say yes, I'm going to help deliver a product that'll use the standard, and then we'll move into the standard writing. I believe the majority of it's kind of already written, because several of the people are have a lot of the work done, but we're just going through the OMG process of getting it done in the 12-month kind of time frame. And so I think a lot of the work's actually really well far down the road, and they have working examples of that already. But we're going through the process side and making sure. If you want to look at the RFP, you can see if we missed anything, and then I believe that we should also have some drafts of the proposal posted pretty soon as well. And all of that can be found. We have an interactive wiki page on the OMG retail website. So if you go to our wiki, that's where we have I try to keep everything, make it a lot easier to find those links to specs that are in process and stuff. You can link directly off of our wiki website.
Okay.
As well as for the agenda for tomorrow, if you're interested.
Wonderful. If we can thank our panel for all that. My last plug will be, I believed it from the beginning when I got involved with standards. I moved a lot of my company's resources into it as well. There were business agendas we had, but we always believed that the contribution was important. And what I would tell you is it wasn't just the standards, it was certain people involved. Those created relationships that are sustained to this day. And years later, fools will still invite you back, obviously. So thank you very much. And I hope the rest of the work you're doing out here is excellent. And most importantly, if you haven't jumped aboard yet, do what you can. And these people are fairly adept at helping you justify that to the folks back home. They have to do it all the time.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.